Simon Baxter from L&Q Housing Association. One of the things that's informing land values and informing lack of affordable housing in London is the use of viability testing for the amount of affordable housing that is given on any particular site. And Steve Norris made some remarks about transparency within the system. There's a lot of lack of transparency about how viability reports are being used. And a way of moving away from that would be very simple. That touches on a point that Mike Diath from HTA, from Hunt Thompson made earlier, is to simply have a flat rate for affordable housing across the board in London. That is not a matter of negotiation on each and every occasion, but is a flat rate that everybody understands, which would also have the effect, I think Mike's right, of bringing down land values over time, because it would mean that everybody was working on the same playing field rather than the system being gamed by people, by developers betting on bids on about how much affordable housing they can squeeze out of the scheme. So I'd like to have some comments from the panel on what they think about that.
Ronald, I'm an engineer. I want to put a thought to the panel about devolution. Presumably the consequence of devolution is that what has to happen centrally is going to become lesser, and therefore we don't need so many MPs. Say perhaps we have 25% of the number of MPs we have at the moment. The consequence of that is, of course, that the Palace of Westminster is irrelevant. It doesn't work the right way. So perhaps we should move Parliament outside of London and allow London to get on with its business of being a great city. We could perhaps move Parliament, say, to Bicester. Probably a good idea to divert HS2 through Bicester, have a stop there. As we all know, all the Chinese that come to this country all go to Bicester as well as London. They probably pay for quite a lot of HS2 in doing it. It's just a little idea to add on to the whole devolution debate. Thank you.
Can we just check, do you have any real estate interest in Bicester?
Do you know something? I have none.
No, okay. So, let's take it to two questions. Should Parliament be moved? And if so, where should it be moved to? That would be interesting. Who else wants to come in?
I'm just interested to know how you get the balance between taking public sector land, specifically, say, from the local authority, say, which would be primarily for schools or for health or parks and leisure. How do we actually get this balance between taking that land away currently and making sure that when the huge population arises, that you've got something for them?
Colin Stanbridge, London Chamber of Commerce. Directed at Steve, really, because Tony's already told me off for saying this. I get very pessimistic about our chances of devolution. Great supporter. We contributed to Tony's report and supported all the way through. But I just feel that London somehow is different. It's all very well giving power to Manchester because it's quite a long way away and most civil servants don't live there and politicians, don't spend much time down there. But giving away power in London is phenomenally difficult because you live there and it controls it. Steve, you've been in government. Do you think there's any chance that we really will get devolution on the coattails of Manchester or wherever it is? And if not, what do we need to do to try and speed the process up?
Mike Diath. My question was, whatever happened to tax increment finance? Seemed to work extremely well in America, and I noted Hudson's Yard, which no doubt benefits from the same approach. I think we flirted with it for Nine Elms, but I'm not at all certain that it actually happened. Is that something that the panel think has resonance for the new mayor?
Risk of being slightly controversial, have we ruled out the option of a Thames Estuary airport too early in the appraisal of the options that maybe come to a conclusion this week?
Right, has it been ruled out too soon? Anyone else?
I think there was quite a bit of resonance when Steve suggested that we take politics out of some of the decisions that are made. I'm not sure the solution, which was to remove it from the councillors and take it to the mayor, would take it away from politics. I'd be interested to know how we can really get it away from politics and achieve what some of the people in the video were suggesting, that we need a long-term approach to this and to do things which give business a consistent approach that they can have confidence and invest in.
Great, thank you. And I guess there's two dimensions to that. One is sort of housing approvals and land use planning decisions. The other is the big infrastructure decisions, isn't it? And where do you need politics and where do you not, I guess, is it. So, panel, we've got about 8 questions. If you were prepared to take 2 or 3 each. The first one was about viability testing and should we move to a flat rate. The second one was about, devolution and should we move Parliament and if so, to where. The third one was about if we use the public sector land for housing, how do we protect enough of it for the amenities and the services that we need. The fourth one was about whether you, Steve, are optimistic about devolution and what's the road map to get there. Fifth one was have we given up on TIF? Are there other kinds of value capture instruments or mechanisms a new mayor might have? Then the Thames Estuary Airport, have we thrown away that idea too soon? And then are there other ways that we can politicise development decisions and infrastructure investment decisions? So, Tony, would you like to pick up first, picking questions that you'd like to comment on?
Okay, well, others I'm sure will want to comment on this. On the flat, I'm not an expert on SIL, but I suspect that one of the problems, I would guess, with a flat rate is that it's in competition with other uses. What intrigues me about the way in which we've evolved, and this is really central government's decisions over a number of years, which London boroughs and the GLA have had to pick up. What we do in London is effectively tax high land values to pay for things the state won't pay for. So that's what we're doing. So, a SIL to pay for housing is taxing housing to build housing, if you think about it, which is a slightly odd way to do it. And so I think that the difficulty with a flat rate would be, it depends on exactly how the money is then to be used for all the good things that by negotiation the public sector is now trying to squeeze money out of developments with government encouragement. And I've been to meetings recently where the public, of course, now knows that because local government spending is being drained away very fast, the only way you can get some assets, some new stuff, new kit, is by negotiating with developers for them to buy it. That's the only chance you've got. So I think this is a very complex process and needs unraveling because the public doesn't understand it, developers get blamed for things that are not their fault, and it just needs to be better understood. And I think the risk is the more the government intervenes with minima or rules, then somehow something else will be done to squeeze money out of the developers. Anyway, so that's one point, and that links directly to TIF. I think the way and Jeremy, who was mentioned earlier, knows more about this than anyone, Jeremy Skinner, I think the way the Northern Line extension, the spur off the Northern Line at Kennington, is being paid for is by, in effect, a TIF. It's by radical increases in development density, going back to that issue, on the Battersea Nine Elms site, which will, when it is constructed, in my view, look very unusual by the standards of London densities, precisely because, like Hudson Yards, which is built at very high densities, it's paying for infrastructure. But that tells us something about the wider question of how, in the longer term, the city will need to develop. And both Fiona and Steve hinted at this. In the end, London, as the rest of the country demands more, public spending continues to decline on these kind of items, which it will, nothing to do with London, but just because the government as a whole is shifting money towards welfare and consumption and not prioritising, I'm afraid, capital investment. So London, which can capture its own land values to invest in itself, will need to demand, I think, from the Treasury and from government, easier mechanisms to allow itself to pay for its own infrastructure. Because at the moment, if you look at Crossrail, or indeed the Northern Line extension at Battersea, they have to be negotiated over years and years, step by step, with the Treasury always trying to keep control over the process. So, Crossrail is actually 2/3 funded not by the Treasury, and yet the Treasury makes the decision. In the end, Battersea, the Nine Elms project, will pay for the tube extension, but the Treasury controls the system. So long as that happens, there's going to be a challenge. And that is the final point. On the question of the balance of power between the mayor and the boroughs, I think it is inevitable that as the city becomes bigger in population terms and densifies, there will be a greater need from time to time for the mayor to override what individual boroughs don't want. In some cases, they do want it, but as Steve rather elegantly put it, a small number of voters can stop the borough doing something it itself wants to do and relies on the mayor to override them. It's not always the case, but it is sometimes. So I think a more densely populated city, and to put it simply, will require more government. And that's something we all have to think about, including the boroughs themselves, if they are not to end up in an antagonistic relationship with the mayor.
Great, thank you very much, Tony. We'll come back at the end and ask you...
I'll come back to the Parliament question if you want.
Yes, indeed. Fiona, would you like to pick up a couple of them?
Sure, I might just start with the Parliament question. I think given the colossal bill, the £3 billion bill for the repairs to the Palace of Westminster, we may have no choice. And then you add that to Buckingham Palace and its leaky roof, or whatever's wrong with it, we could move everybody out. This happens in newer countries than our own. One of our competitor cities, New York, doesn't have government, so might be something in it. On the more techie stuff around viability and Simon's point, I have developers who sit in front of me on a weekly basis with the most colossal schemes in Zone 1, prime London, and they tell me that the development is just getting its head above water, couldn't possibly afford to contribute to affordable housing in any way. There's something wrong with the viability system, because when we check it out, it turns out they're right. So that there's something going wrong. And it isn't just simply that we're asking a lot of other infrastructure from the development. I don't know what the answer is, I'm afraid, but I think we need to keep looking at this issue because it isn't working. The TIF model, as Tony has said, Vauxhall 9 Elms, Battersea, the Northern Line extension will be paid in a TIF-like mechanism if we ever get through the torturous meetings with Treasury. It hasn't quite been signed off yet, even though we're building it. The problem for us is with TIF-like models here, though, they are based on commercial development. And we're using up rates and commercial business rate payments, and that's very difficult. If we really want to use it for, say, the Bakerloo line extension, where there won't necessarily be a high amount of commercial development along the route, we don't have a mechanism. And we are talking to Treasury, but not very fruitfully, about the idea of stamp duty, residential stamp duty in an area being used as some mechanism to fund the infrastructure that's going to develop the housing. This could possibly be an answer for part of Crossrail 2, for our ambitious plans to put some of our grottier motorways and roads into tunnels. But we're not getting a lot of leverage on that. We need some kind of model that recognises value uplift in residential as well as commercial.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Nikki, your thoughts?
Yes, on viability. Well, we all know that land values now are being absolutely artificially pumped up in London. And we have to look, there are a number of government and, dare I say, even mayoral initiatives within the planning system which are actually forcing up land values. And I would particularly pick out the government's National Planning Policy Framework, which redefined viability as competitive returns to a willing landlord and developer without the burden of extra things, e.g. affordable housing. And what that means is that the developers and the land buyers right at the beginning factor in that they're not going to have this burden lower down the line. And I could go into their and boroughs can't do much about it because they're not allowed to put any rent guidance or rent levels in their plans. Boris has taken that, not allowed them to do that, so using the planning system in that way. So what happens is that they value the land without having the affordable housing in it. And then when it comes to the actual development phase and the viability assessment, then what happens is, regardless of whatever the district valuation service says, and we've seen this in Earl's Court, for instance, the developer, and here the mayor is a joint venture partner, the developer will actually downvalue, their valuation assessment will downvalue the scheme, saying that, in Earl's Court's case, that it will flatline for the next 22 years. So what happens is that the scheme value reduces from 12 billion to to 8 billion. That's 4 billion that could have been used for affordable housing. And this is happening in many cases across London. Now, what we need is a more holistic, a very different interpretation of viability, which deals with many of the points raised in those questions. And I would say that on public land, the mayor has now the biggest, I think it's the biggest, you have to say, property, land portfolio in TfL's property portfolio around stations. And obviously, this is a great opportunity to intensify development around stations, but we mustn't do it at the expense of mixed use, and we mustn't do it only to maximize value in financial terms. We've got to show the leadership and have a more holistic approach to the viability of densifying those areas around stations.
Nikki, thank you very much indeed. Steve, let's come to you. There are quite a few questions directed at you. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about devolution? What about the Thames Estuary Airport, Steve? What about other ideas for depoliticising development? Where would you like to start?
Yeah, I know at my age I had to write them all down because 8 was far too many. It's terrifying. Well, just to answer some of them fairly quickly, I mean, my point was that actually, compared to some of the industries that I get involved in, property is a remarkably transparent business. And actually it follows that I'm not unsympathetic at all to the idea of setting a particular proportion of affordable land. And actually it follows in a sense on some of the things that Nikki's been saying and that Tony said, which is that, you know, ultimately the land value is a reflection of what you think the outturn price is going to be. And I have no problem with the idea that land values themselves are excessively high, because it's blindingly obvious that that's the case. And I think anything we can do which can calm the market in that sense is very, very welcome indeed. Incidentally, I mean, there's no dispute among local authorities as to what the developer margin ought reasonably to be, as you will well know. If that's the case, then let's get on and devise a formula that keeps the land cost lower, because ultimately that's where the greatest gain is. It's not the developer, it's the landowner. And if you can keep that down, then you have a chance of delivering more affordable housing. That's the first one. Just on the Estuary Airport, the Estuary Airport is a brilliantly good answer to entirely the wrong question. Which is, what would you do if you could start all over again with airport capacity in London? Let me tell you one thing you would never do. You can go to all those Chinese cities, the names of which we've never heard of, which are, you know, now housing 10 million upwards, and you will find that not a single one of them ever thought about the idea of overflying the whole city in order to actually access the airport. You know, the old Heston Aerodrome opened in 1927 and then grew after by Topsy, like Topsy, is simply in the wrong place. It's as simple as that. However, as Boris is now discovering as the Member of Parliament for Uxbridge, yeah, in Uxbridge, they don't want a third runway, but they don't want you to close the two they've got. And what nobody's ever explained to me is what you're going to do to get that sort of 20-year transition from it being, you know, one of the world's largest and most complex airports to being, let's say, a new thriving borough in London, you know, with a great sort of science complex attached to it. How you're actually going to go from 31st of December airport, 1st of January fully built tech city, and what you do in between. So as far as I'm concerned, no, that's not the answer. And the answer to airport expansion, assuming that you need it, is that actually we will go to Gatwick next. Thereafter, we will go to Stansted, Stansted, and Stansted. An airport that was designed for 4 runways, currently running with 1, with the right kind of linkages, and incidentally, Crossrail 2 helps you to deliver that. Then you've got your, you know, airline capacity sorted. Now, incidentally, the value of both Gatwick and Stansted is that they don't overfly the most populous city in Europe, which is a suicidally stupid thing to do. Now, you know, you can't blame our predecessors because Heston Aerodrome was an hour and a half's drive away from Knightsbridge when it was open. Sadly, that's no longer a relevant consideration. You'll have gathered I'm not a great fan. As far as a very important question about public land was concerned, because you're absolutely right. You can't just take every inch of public land that isn't currently used, and that's where a decent planning system, a good forward look at infrastructure and the needs of the city has to make an assessment of how many more schools, police stations, health clinics, you know, pieces of infrastructure that we're going to need, what land is absolutely vital for, you know, projected future infrastructure improvement, lines of route that need to be protected. I've worked with lines of route that have been protected now for nearly 40 years, and they're still there. Some of the Crossrail 2 protected lines of route down the King's Road and in parts of southwest London have been there since I was young. And that, believe you me, is a hell of a long time ago. But on the other hand, the opposite of that is that you don't do anything. And we all know that, for example, within hospital sites, there are masses of land that is terribly, terribly badly utilised. It's not being utilised by the NHS themselves, where incidentally all the accident, as you know, is on a faster turnaround of people in terms of the time that they actually stay in hospital. There's a huge opportunity just there. I'm not talking about concreting over playing fields either. There are all sorts of obvious things that you would not do, but the potential to deliver much more productive value out of that spare land, genuinely spare land, is one that you do have to take. When you look at London from the air, and there's now a brilliant new plan of this in the new London Architecture Centre, what's really striking about it is what a low-rise city it is. You've got a cluster in the city, you've got a cluster in Docklands, you've got a cluster in Croydon, you're now getting another cluster in Vauxhall Nine Elms, and everywhere else is remarkably low-rise. And when you compare that low-rise graph, if you like, which charts, the height of buildings and the density of buildings across the whole area of the city, you'll see that London is the lowest rise major city in the world, lower than any of its comparables. And that's something we ought to bear in mind. There is a huge potential for space to be better utilised than it is. Just on a couple of other issues, I think as far as the devolution agenda is concerned, Colin, it's worth just remembering that the Greater London Authority Act itself was a major step forward. I mean, we'd had the GLC, which was arguably, not fit for purpose, and certainly became, in the end, something of a laughingstock. But the alternative, which I personally had to grapple with, was having no strategic governance in London. And one of my strong recommendations to my party, which I'm delighted that they took when we lost office in 1997, was not to oppose the referendum to approve a Greater London Authority bill and to support that bill when it came before the House. We did that. We created the GLA. It's a relatively thin strategic body, and it's delivered enormous benefits under 2 mayors. Only 2. 20 years from now, the whole idea that we might not have a strategic body representing a city region would be laughed out of court. In Manchester and Birmingham, they've come to it later. Howard Bernstein always used to say to Howard, you should be the elected mayor of London. No, he said, dear boy, I don't want to be elected mayor of Manchester. And he didn't have to be, because he was already. Howard has already galvanized all of the Manchester city region to create the equivalent of what's happening in London, a proper city region, centrally directed. And now, George Osborne, who was very attracted to that, has said, that's a great idea, Howard. Let's actually deliver that. Let's make something out of that. And I think our opportunity now is to say, you're actually now, George, talking about giving Manchester actually more than you gave to London. So why don't we now just assume that wherever we've decided these things can work, we should make the equivalent amendment to the Greater London Authority Act and give it to London. I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't, because actually, of all the city regions, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, and so on, London is the most natural city region. It's absolutely determinable by the 33 boroughs, by the M25, but that whole area is very much both geographically defined and it's defined by its economy. So I'm a great fan. Incidentally, you want to take Parliament, I don't care how many MPs you get as long as it doesn't affect my pension. Are there too many? Yeah, arguably. It depends whether you agree with them or not.
Would you go to Bicester?
No, bugger Bicester. I mean, I'm not the slightest bit interested in going to Bicester. I've told my wife that it's a mile away and it costs a fortune to get there just to put her off ever going. But no, I'll tell you seriously, the Palace of Westminster is one of the most glorious buildings in Europe. It's a phenomenally beautiful building. It's the first example of massively integrated interior decor, because you know that Pugin and Barry, who designed it between them, were the first pair who actually delivered this astonishingly World Heritage Site, most beautiful building, I think, in the whole city. Of course, the problem is nobody spent any money on it for a century, and all we're having to do now, as always, is pay a fortune to maintain something which, if we'd had a proper planned maintenance programme, we would never have to face. The same, incidentally, for that matter, goes for Buckingham Palace. So no, I'll keep Parliament in London. It's blindingly obvious, it's logical, it's the greatest city in Europe, it's where our Parliament ought to be. And if you've ever been to Brasilia, which I have to say I've had the pleasure of doing, you'll realise what an utterly nuts idea it is to take Parliament away from the greatest city in the country.
Thank you very much, Stephen. The same thing might be true of Canberra as well. But
yeah, well, yeah.
We're going to finish, but I want to give Tony a chance just to come in on this question about the Parliament and should it be moved.
I mean, this is something that is discussed from time to time. Harold Wilson's government, you know, in all its various ways, discussed this, and every now and again somebody comes up with an idea to do it. But I think the real barrier to it, and you know, in some ways, if it were to happen, you know, some of the buildings that government operates out of could be put to economically productive use. You know, I mean, the higher value added in the building. But the truth is, powerful people like to be near other powerful people, and in the end, that more than anything else is a barrier to anything really happening. Every now and again we get moves of civil servants out of London, but oddly, the headquarters always remains in Whitehall. So the NHS remember the NHS went to Leeds? Well, it didn't really, did it? BBC goes to Salford, well, all the headquarters functions remain in London. And the truth is, as I say, powerful people can't feel powerful unless they meet other powerful people like themselves. And that being the case, this will all stay here.
So Bista's a non-starter, really, then, Tony?
Well, you know, it seems to be nice for shopping for overseas visitors, and what's wrong with that?
Any final comments from Fiona or Nikki before Steve has one, and then we'll wind up?
Just a quick one. I think somebody used the word housing crisis earlier. I don't know, this feels a bit like Athens did this morning. Doesn't really feel like a crisis. So I think we need some radical thoughts on housing, and I'm not sure we're getting them from anybody.
That sounds like an invitation.
It is indeed.
Yeah, so base London, let's have some kind of debate about real innovation in the housing market. Nikki, a final comment?
Yeah, I would say that we'll never get the housing we need in London unless we set councils free to build council housing in the way they did, and also to partner with the private sector in doing that. And I would say that we're the only country, I think, now in the world that still has the rules that say that borrowing for housing has to be part of the public sector borrowing requirement. And I think it's time we recognise that building homes gives you an income asset, and it's an asset, it appreciates, and you get an income stream. And therefore, I think I would really want to encourage the private sector, because I don't think the city has any objections at all to this, to actually put some suggestions to government about relaxing the rules on accounting in relation to housing by councils.
Great. So change the way we calculate the PSBR. Good thought. Steve?
Oh, I'm astonished because I agree entirely with Nikki.
Yeah.
I would just leave that there. It's entirely right. When the Conservative government in the 50s built 300,000 homes in a year, it did so recognising it was building an asset which was worth something which could then sell once it had actually housed people. I have no problem with that idea at all. I think we should be pursuing it. But no, I was just going to make one point about Tony's observation around government. The serious answer is that London should actually send tens of thousands of government employees out of the city. You know, as HSBC is just taking 1,000 people to Birmingham, as Format Credit is taking 700 people up to Manchester, because the cost is lower, because the property cost is lower, because personnel costs are lower, because we will have the kind of connectivity that HS2 delivers to us, with all of the internet connectivity that we need. You know, there is now no reason why we can't continue that move, and government, I think, should really be part of it. Just to make something clear, I worked in 4 departments of state, and I can tell you that in none of them did ministers have to engage with more than probably about 100 members of staff, some whom you met every day, some you met once a week, some of whom you probably only met once or twice a year. The other 1,000 or so could easily be somewhere else. frankly. And to me, one of the great and serious objectives of government should be to take the Department of Work and Pensions back to Leeds. It should be to take the Department of Transport to Birmingham, right in the centre of the country. It should be to take DCMS to Liverpool, to take, all of these departments away from very expensive central London property, because when you do that, what you'll find is that a lot of other peripheral business will actually want to follow them, because they want to be close to those departments and because they want to feed off them. And now, when we're releasing that kind of pressure out of the pressure cooker, we're actually helping so much of the London, central problem, which for me is that fortress proposition. A fortress is because, I daren't leave because I own a home here and, it's my kind of fallback pension reserve. The day I swapped my 2-bedroom flat in Hackney for a 5-bedroom detached house in Middlesbrough is the day I'll never be able to buy that flat back again. But on the other hand, it's a fortress because if you want to try and come into the city, you want to buy property here, it's almost impossible to be able to do so if you haven't already got some sort of interest in property long term. Releasing that pressure, spreading the burden across the country as well as the benefit, I think should be a real priority for government. By all means, keep the decision-making forum in that wonderful palace on the Thames. But as far as officials are concerned, I'm afraid, Tony, I believe you can and should take tens of thousands of them out of the centre of the city and into those economies in the other cities of this country that desperately need them.
Please join me in thanking Professor Tony Travers, Fiona Fletcher-Smith, Nikki Gavron and Steve Norris. Thank you very much indeed.